There is something that happens to sleep after 50 that almost no one is told about. Not the superficial version. Not, you sleep lighter as you age, as if it's a resigned fact to accept. The specific, mechanistic version. What changes in your sleep biology after 50? Which of your habits used to be manageable and are now in a body that has crossed that threshold, doing measurable damage to the quality of the one process your brain and body depend on most? Because here is what I want you to understand before we go any further. The habits that destroy sleep in a 55-year-old are often the exact same habits that barely touch sleep at 35. The same glass of wine, the same irregular weekend schedule, the same late screen use, same behavior, completely different biological cost. Because the system receiving those inputs has changed, fundamentally, in three specific ways, and most people have never been told how. Let me start with what changes. After 50, the slow wave sleep that dominates the first half of the night, the deepest, most biologically active phase, the phase where your body releases growth hormone to repair tissue, where your brain runs the glymphatic cleaning process that removes the proteins associated with dementia. This phase begins to decline. Not slowly, measurably. Research using continuous EEG recordings across the lifespan shows that slow-wave sleep begins declining in the late 20s, but the steepest portion of that decline occurs between 50 and 70. At the same time, the melatonin system, the hormonal signal that drives the transition into deep sleep, is producing less. The pineal gland, which synthesizes melatonin, calcifies progressively with age. The retinal ganglion cells that transmit the light-to-darkness signal to the master clock become less sensitive to dim light. The amplitude of the melatonin cycle, the difference between its nighttime peak and its daytime nadir, flattens. The signal that used to efficiently pull you into deep sleep is still there, but it is quieter, more easily overridden by competing inputs. A 2025 review in PMC, covering 50 studies on melatonin and aging, concluded that reduced melatonin synthesis in older adults contributes directly to circadian amplitude flattening, fragmented sleep, and increased susceptibility to insomnia. A 2025 paper in PMC on circadian rhythm disruption and cardiovascular disease confirmed the same mechanism. In older individuals, age-related deterioration of the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock in the hypothalamus, and reduced melatonin levels specifically contribute to cardiometabolic dysfunction. This is not a background fact. It is the biological context that makes the three habits I am about to describe so much more consequential after 50 than they were before. Because the habits that can override a strong, youthful melatonin signal produce a fundamentally different outcome when the signal is already compromised. What used to delay sleep by 20 minutes now delays it by an hour. What used to produce a slightly shallower first sleep cycle now eliminates slow-wave sleep for half the night. What used to be mildly disruptive is now severely disruptive, and the person experiencing it has no way to know, because they are measuring sleep by duration and waking feeling the same degree of tired they have felt for years. Here are the three habits. The first is the one most adults over 50 use specifically as a sleep aid: evening alcohol. This is the most psychologically embedded habit on this list, because it works. The beer or the glass of wine in the evening genuinely relaxes. It does genuinely reduce the anxiety that can delay sleep onset. And for many people, it does produce a faster fall into sleep than they would achieve without it. The problem is, what happens next? And after 50, what happens next is worse than it ever was. Alcohol is metabolized by the liver over several hours after consumption. The time to metabolize depends on quantity and body weight. But for a typical adult drinking 1 to 2 glasses of wine, blood alcohol concentration is still declining. The liver is still processing, 3 to 5 hours after consumption. For someone who drinks at 8 and goes to bed at 10, peak liver processing falls squarely between midnight and 3 in the morning. As blood alcohol drops, the nervous system rebounds, cortisol rises, adrenaline increases, the sympathetic nervous system activates, and this hormonal rebound has two specific consequences for sleep architecture. The first is fragmentation of the second half of the night. More arousals, more transitions between sleep stages, lighter overall sleep. A systematic review and meta-analysis published in Sleep Medicine Reviews in November 2024, analyzing 27 studies, found that alcohol consumption produces a dose-dependent delay in REM sleep onset and a reduction in REM sleep duration, with disruptions to REM sleep beginning at as little as 2 standard drinks. The more alcohol, the greater the disruption. REM sleep after 50 is not optional. It is the phase where emotional memory consolidation occurs, where associative thinking is restored, where the brain processes the emotional experiences of the day. REM sleep is also the phase most directly affected by the age-related changes I described, the phase that a 50-year-old has less of to begin with. Alcohol does not just reduce it further. In a body already running a depleted reserve, it eliminates a meaningful portion of what remains. A narrative review published in 2025, covering a decade of evidence on alcohol, wine, and sleep, confirmed that age-related changes in metabolism and sleep architecture specifically intensify the late-night rebound effects of alcohol, resulting in more pronounced fragmentation and arousal in older adults compared to younger ones. The same drink, more damage, because the system receiving it has less resilience and less reserve. The intervention is not total elimination. The evidence does not require that. It is timing and quantity. Stopping drinking at least 3 hours before your intended sleep time and limiting to 1 drink on nights when the timing makes 3 hours difficult substantially reduces the rebound effect. For many people, this single change, not eliminating alcohol, just giving the liver 3 hours to finish its work before you sleep, produces measurable improvement in how they feel by the end of the first week. The second habit is one that modern retirement culture has made almost universal: irregular sleep schedules, specifically the weekend shift. Monday through Thursday, a consistent bedtime. Friday and Saturday, staying up 2-3 hours later, because it's the weekend, because there is nothing to be up for, because sleep can be caught up later. It cannot. The body's master clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus, synchronizes every organ clock in the body, every hormone cycle, every metabolic process, to the timing of light exposure and sleep. When you consistently go to bed at 10 on weekdays and midnight on weekends, you are doing the equivalent of flying from New York to London every Friday and flying back every Sunday. The biological term for this is social jet lag. Circadian research published in Circulation Research in 2025 reviewed the cumulative evidence and found that sleep irregularity, inconsistent day-to-day sleep timing, is a robust risk factor for obesity, metabolic syndrome, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and mortality. Critically, the review noted that in some studies, sleep irregularity is a more significant predictor of cardiometabolic risk than sleep duration. You could be sleeping 8 hours on an irregular schedule and sustaining more metabolic damage than someone sleeping 6.5 hours on a perfectly consistent one. A Harvard study on circadian misalignment found that misaligning sleep by just 12 hours, the kind of internal timeline disruption that shift workers experience, but that approximates the chronic weekly disruption of social jet lag, increased 24-hour IL-6 levels by 15% and raised blood pressure in subjects. These are not academic data points. They are measurable inflammatory and cardiovascular consequences of inconsistent sleep timing. After 50, the circadian system has less amplitude, less ability to absorb and recover from misalignment. The master clock is already producing a weaker signal. Each weekend shift hits a system that was already less able to compensate for it than it was at 35. And the effects compound. The person who has maintained this pattern for a decade is not experiencing 2 nights of disruption per week. They are experiencing chronic, low-grade circadian misalignment that their system has never fully adapted to. The intervention: a 30 to 45-minute maximum deviation from your weekday bedtime on weekends. Not midnight if your normal bedtime is 10. Not even 11:30. The window is small because the biology is unforgiving. This is the change that produces the most dramatic morning improvement of any of the 3, because the circadian timing of sleep determines the quality of deep sleep, and deep sleep quality is what determines whether you feel genuinely rested or just technically slept. The third habit is the most universal of all: screens after dark. I know this is not new information. I know you have heard this. I know you are going to tell yourself that you use night mode, that you keep the brightness low, that it does not seem to affect you. Here is what changes after 50 that makes it matter more than it did before. your melatonin signal is already weaker. The difference between your nighttime peak and your daytime baseline is smaller than it was 15 years ago. That means the window in which blue wavelength light can suppress melatonin, the window in which the signal is strong enough to matter, begins earlier in the evening than it used to. The same screen that used to be irrelevant at 9 is now relevant at 8. The same screen that used to produce a 20-minute delay in sleep onset is now producing a 40-minute delay, because the signal it is overriding is quieter, and quieter signals are easier to override. A 2025 paper in PMC on circadian rhythm disruption and cardiovascular disease confirmed this directly. In older individuals, irregular sleep-wake schedules combined with artificial light exposure at night, specifically blue-enriched light from electronic devices, suppress endogenous melatonin release and exacerbate age-related flattening of the circadian amplitude. The consequence is not just delayed sleep. It is reduced slow-wave amplitude, reduced glymphatic clearance efficiency, and the downstream accumulation of metabolic and cognitive costs that follows. What makes this particularly insidious after 50 is the context. Retirement often means less structured daytime activity, less natural morning light exposure, more evening leisure time with screens. Every one of those shifts compounds the melatonin problem. Less morning light weakens the circadian signal during the day. Less physical activity reduces adenosine buildup, which weakens sleep pressure. More evening screen time suppresses the melatonin signal just as it needs to be rising. The result is a person who cannot fall asleep easily, cannot stay in deep sleep when they do, and wakes earlier than they want to. Not because aging inevitably produces this, but because a specific combination of habits is systematically dismantling the sleep system that was already operating with reduced reserves. The intervention is 90 minutes, not 60. After 50, the melatonin suppression from screen use is harder to recover from, because there is less signal amplitude to recover. 90 minutes of no screens before your target sleep time gives your pineal gland enough of a window to produce the melatonin peak that pulls you into deep sleep on something close to schedule. Adding deliberate morning light exposure, 10 minutes of natural light within an hour of waking, is the other half of this intervention. You are not just reducing the evening suppressor, you are strengthening the morning anchor that drives the circadian cycle forward. Let me now give you the three together as a practice. Stop drinking alcohol at least 3 hours before you go to bed. This is the minimum. If your target bedtime is 10, your last drink is at 7. This is not about abstaining. It is about giving your liver time to finish its work before sleep begins, so the sympathetic rebound does not hit at 2 in the morning. Maintain a bedtime that does not vary by more than 30 to 45 minutes between weekdays and weekends. This is the hardest one socially and the most biologically important. The weekend shift is the habit that most directly accelerates the age-related deterioration of sleep architecture because it is the one that directly undermines circadian timing, the foundation that every other sleep variable is built on. Enforce a 90-minute screen cutoff. Replace the last 90 minutes before bed with something that does not produce short wavelength light, a physical book, low-light conversation, music, low-temperature activity. Start your morning with natural light. These two changes together, reducing the evening suppressor and strengthening the morning anchor, are the most effective non-pharmacological intervention in sleep chronobiology for older adults. None of these changes require purchasing anything. None require willpower at a scale that would make them unsustainable. They require understanding why they matter. And after 50, the biology gives you a very clear answer to that. Your sleep system after 50 is not broken. It is operating with less margin than it used to have. The habits that respected that margin when you had more of it are exceeding it now. That is the whole problem, and it is entirely solvable. Try this tonight. All three, or start with one. The one most likely to produce the fastest noticeable change is the irregular schedule, because when your circadian timing is right, everything else in your sleep biology performs better. Your brain is telling you it needs this. You now know exactly what to give it.